So first of all, let me briefly introduce our presenter today to you first. So our first presenter will be Sunjin He, who is a project assistant professor at the Beyond AI Global Forum in the University of Tokyo. Her expertise is in critical social theory, especially in the concept of alienation, time, and morality. In her presentation today, she will posit some theoretical points to reconstruct the simple grounding problem in respect to varying perspectives on language. And the second presenter will be myself. I'm currently working as an assistant professor in Rikkyo University. My expertise is in critical applied linguistics. I'm especially interested in language ontology at the moment. So in my talk today, I will be discussing about how can the concept of authorship and plagiarism be seen differently with the prevalence of AI. Our last presenter will be Priya, who is a doctoral student at the Graduate School of Interdisciplinary Information Studies in the University of Tokyo. She's also working as a research assistant at the Beyond AI Global Forum. And in her presentation today, she will discuss how AI is utilized in creative industries such as architecture and fashion, and how it influences on the selfhood of the artist and some of the ethical concerns that may arise in this context. So all of us are very much looking forward to discuss this rapidly changing topic with all of you. Let me briefly talk about different parts of our session today. So we'll begin with three presentations one by one. And after that, we will have a 10-minute break. And after the break, when everyone come back from the break, we will have breakout room sessions. We'll have 3 breakout rooms with questions that relate to each presentation. So you can freely choose which breakout room you want to join and which discussion you want to join. The breakout room discussion session will last around 20 minutes. So we will ask everybody to come back to the main session at around 20 to 8. And then after that, we will have 20 minutes for you to, we'll open the floor for you to either share your discussion in the breakout room, or if you have any questions for all of us or any whichever presenter you like, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask us any questions. So the whole session for today will last for about 2 hours. Yeah, sorry for the very long housekeeping thing, and maybe we can welcome, if you don't have any questions to confirm, maybe we can welcome our first presenter, Sunjin, to share her screen and then give us her talk.
You see my screen in full screen. Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good good evening, everyone. I'm Sunjin He from the BAI Global Forum, as Xinqi has introduced kindly. In this presentation, I would like to pose one possible viewpoint when we discuss how the advent of large language models may change our look at self and others and language. Here is the contents today. Okay, I divided digitalized personal relationship into 2 types of relationships. I would say digitalization brought about a mental transformation in both interpersonal relationships and relationships with non-human others. When we conceive of these 2 types of digitalized personal relationship from a critical social theoretical point of view, we may conclude that both can be regarded as quantification or capitalization of qualities of self and others, and we might call it qualities of love and friendship. For interpersonal relationships, there has been growing concerns among humanities and social scientists for people to be growingly picky across multiple transient relationships. And for person-AI relationship or person-machine relationship, risks for people to indulge in quasi-relationships, replacing an engagement with the particularity of actual individual human subject has been posed by researchers. Overall, in a very much Marxist point of view, these trends could be interpreted as a quantification or capitalization of the particularity and quality of self and other. Scoping into human-machine companionship, one dominant critical point of view is from Anthony Elliott. According to Elliott, the characteristics of relationships with advanced machines, such as emotional AI, are pseudo-reciprocal, quasi-interactive, and with one-sided emotional connections and 24/7 available, disembodied voices to fashion a mirror images of classic kind of companionship is there. In Japan, an emotional robotics called Labot provides a strikingly clear example of this. The developing company recently started a ghost inheritance service, a service that transfers the memories and personality of an interactive robot into a new machine. Its memories and personality would be essentially its data. So this data takes on the role of a soul and can be replaced with a flawless body at any time. The key point to note is that it is believed that with this visibility and maneuverability of their soul, they can enhance the human capacity to love even further. The human power of love. What was that? Let's move back to Elliott's argument. It is quite interesting that he never discussed the genuine, true kind of personal relationship or the grounded companionship. Instead, he only have a comparison between relationship with advanced machine companions and parasocial relationships, which have been brought about by the development of mass media in 1950s. While parasocial relationships were feared in the 1950s to hinder the formation of normal social kind of relationships, recent researchers has shown that they are now among the typical ways of social relationship. With this type of argument, Eliot tries to stress the aspect of historical construction, denying the unchangeable, universal concept of true and, how can I say, priceless, true and genuine, authentic kind of companionship. So on the other hand, his argument also offers glimpses of what the true, genuine, authentic kind of companionship might entail. This is particularly evident in his observations about language. Here he runs in a roundabout way that the language scripted by machine learning algorithms is revealed as flamed in terms of prescripted generalities. Prescripted generalities. Thus, an engagement with the particularity of the individual human subject remains nowhere in sight in the discourse of machine intelligence. As such, the grounded kind of relationship seems somehow threatened by algorithms and their advanced processing over natural language, since it's disconnected from our ineluctable emotionality, as Eliot puts. In the conversation with the emotional robotics, we are facing the datafied and generalized others, while in the encounter with the human others, people who are involved here and now are connected to their ineluctable emotionality. This is what Eliot is saying. Here, he also assumes the problematic use of language by algorithms, which is disconnected from particularity of others and legitimate use of language linked to particularity. So let me switch into the basic primal overview of LLMs. LLMs like GPT are feed-forward networks that use transformers to proceed vector embeddings of words. Through a self-attention mechanism, transformers update these embeddings across multiple layers to incorporate contextual information. To simplify things, their essence lies in their ability to express probabilistic relationships between words while incorporating contextual information, probabilistic relationships between words. So one of the limitations of the LLMs inheriting from their ancestors is said symbol grounding problem. This arises from the premise that understanding meaning requires linking words to things and concepts. In linguistic way to express this, relating the signifiers to the signified. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, both of classical natural language processing and LLMs are considered limited because of its inability to achieve grounding. However, what is surprising is that while LLMs still lack symbol grounding, they are almost perfectly able to use language effectively. Here arises the possibility that symbol grounding is not necessary for understanding meaning. This outstanding performance of LLMs prompts us to question if symbol grounding is really necessary for understanding meaning or learning language. Okay, we may prompted to ask in the first place, why should the symbol grounding problem is needed to be addressed? We don't even know actually what symbols and grounding entails. Actually, there are many competing points of view about this, starting from Saussure, the founder of modern linguistics. He sees the language as a collective system of signs, and he sees the linkage between the signifiers and the signified constitute the signs. However, this Saussurean idea of language and the sign has been questioned by many from Merleau-Ponty and Levinas and others. Today, I would like to stand in the Levinasian point of view and redefine the symbol grounding problem and see what can be altered. Grounding of meaning is generally understood among linguists as the ability to clearly comprehend the relationship between the signifier and the signified. This belief is based on Saussurean linguistics. However, Levinas posits that signification precedes the sign, while Saussurean linguistics presume that signification follows the existence of the signifiant and the signifier, the signifier and the signified. Yeah, so that Levinas can put an emphasis on the act of signifying via the ethical encounter with the other and the self. Levinas puts that it is not the mediation of the sign that makes signification possible, but it is signification whose original event is the face-to-face encounter that makes the function of the sign possible. Let me skip the middle part and continues to sense is the face of another, and any recourse to the word is already placed within the face-to-face, the origin of language. Okay, through discussions like this, we can conclude that with these two critical points as follows. First, is grounding achieved through the relationship between the signifier and the signified, or through ethical encounters? By adopting Levinas's point of view, the theoretical possibility of the lateral approach, grounding through ethical encounter, is demonstrated. Sense is not acquired through the symmetric relationships of the signifier and the signified within a linguistic system and their arbitrariness, but is instead generated through ethical and relational meanings, such as responsibility towards others and their otherness. Okay. Second, about how we see the limitations of LLMs. From the preceding point of view, language understanding in machine learning can be seen as limited for the absence of this ethical dimension. As such, LLMs, while processing symbols without any ethical calls from others, are permanently devoid of grounding. LLMs reflect only a form of language as a kind of dead archives, which, although syntactically and semantically sophisticated, is, if not have to be, devoid of its ground. I am just paraphrasing what I have said in a different terms in this slide, so I will skip this. Okay. So for today's breakout session discussion, I would like to ask you to give a thought on these kinds of questions, standing on your own point of view and from the viewpoint of your own research field. The ground of language and the ground of companionship. If the ground of language is neither of a trajectory nor of existential reference point, what would be the ground for the language? And for the ground of companionship, if it's supposed to be beyond the realm of scientific hypothetical testing, what would be that? If we assume that signification as the act of signifying, preceding all of the existence of the what is signified and what is signifying, then it would not be the historical heritages of language, the archives of language. It will be something very emergent, embedded within the encounter in the face-to-face encounters with ethical others. So we would think about to what extent do the ground of language and the ground of interpersonal relationships overlap. In Levinasian sense, these ground of language and companionship somehow overlaps, and this overlapping comes to the core of this discourse, since this can bring about the ethical dimension of the language and the emergence of the language. Okay, my presentation is over here.
Thank you much.
And yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, Sunjin, for your fascinating talk. I believe the audience must have a lot of things they want to share or they want to ask, but we'll hold the discussion session later. So I'll shamelessly introduce the second presentation that is from me. So if I can share my screen here. Can you see it? Okay, well, okay. All right. Thank you for coming again. My talk today is titled "A Post-Humanist Perspective on Plagiarism in the Era of AI." So today I'm going to share some primitive finding or thoughts on a project that I'm still doing right now. So any feedback, any comments will be very welcome and helpful for me to further develop my project. So the prevalence of the usage of AI raised a great concern among educators and academics. You can find research papers showing addressing how AI might put a threat on academic ethics, or the paper that talking about how we could avoid plagiarism or how we could detect plagiarism while AI tools is commonly used among academics and students. The reason why AI puts individuals under the threat is because the mechanism, by AI, I refer to generative AI and especially large language model. So what large language model show us is, it seems like it's the machine who learn and generate language patterns. And these phenomena destabilize the conventional concept of author, which we often, in most of the case, we refer to human beings who learn and generate language patterns. And the idea of author is the fundamental idea of plagiarism. So that's why it kind of concerned people. The debate around whether we should ascribe authorship to AI kind of divided in different groups. Some scholars say kind of deny the authorship to a generative AI and argue that because it's kind of like the human mental status such as intention and knowing when it comes to writing. Some other group argue that the authorship should be ascribed to the developer for the codes. And the more liberal perspective will say, yeah, we should ascribe authorship to generative AI. So you can see that this debate of whether ascribed authorship or not seem to based on a human or non-human boundary, whether we think the machine possesses the human feature, and if yes, then it deserves the authorship. But I'm wondering whether human features is the only elements that we use to define an author. So Freud in 2021 pointed out that author is it has the function of transform the text that it produced into an exploitable commodity. So in other words, author is the figure that is acknowledged in the market that can produce something to be circulated. And Foucault, in his essay, What is an Author, also mentioned about different function of the author. He mentioned, he argued that the idea of author is closely tied to a logic of appropriation, what can be appropriated. So if you think carefully, like the receipt or the random notes, normally we don't talk about the author of the receipt or random notes, right? So it's not everything is entitled with an author. And Foucault also mentioned that this rule of what can be appropriate is actually changed over time. He pointed out in his essay that in around 14th century, the requirement of an author in literature work is pretty light. So we don't require much about an author for literature work, but we have a strong requirement of an author in the scientific field. But this rule flips when it comes to around 17th and 18th century. So you can see that who is able to possess the text, the writing, or what type of writing can be possessed is actually constructed in a society which keeps changing. And this fact actually caught my attention because I was working in my PhD thesis in language ideology, where all those language which are titled as non-native, quote unquote non-native, and all those speakers who are titled, who are labeled as non-native are positioned constantly in an inferior place. So for example, those language who are regarded as non-native, quote unquote, are regarded as often the case mistake, or they're being excluded from the teaching material. And those speakers who are labeled as non-native will be regarded as a forever learner, and they will be positioned as inferior compared to their quote unquote native counterparts. So you can see that this research of authorship, the rule of who can possess writing, and this argument of language rights or language ownership, who can claim their language, seem to intersect in a situation where language learner who seem not to have very guaranteed rights, faced with the situation of plagiarism, which is based on the market rule of who is able to possess the writing. So in order to dig deeper in this situation, I conducted interviews with 8 instructors and 20 students in EMI programs. EMI refers to English as medium of instruction. So it's a course is entirely conducted in English here in Japan. So I met each of them for one-time interview, asked about their experience or their students' experience using different type of text-generated tools and their understanding of the idea of plagiarism. And as I mentioned before, this is still an ongoing project. So I'll just be showing some primitive finding and thoughts here. So this is a conversation I had with Emma, and all the names you saw in this presentation are pseudonyms. So Emma is right now currently a third-year university student in EMI program. When I asked her experience about plagiarism, she mentioned about her story back in high school. She joined a 2-year a program called IBDP, International baccalaureate diploma, which is a 2-year course conducted entirely in English. So Emma said she learned the idea about plagiarism in that program, which is pretty strict. So she kind of developed this habit of changing every word's vocabulary when she wants to use the information from other sites, and she'll put the notes whenever she finds information from other sites, remind herself that she need to add the citation and she need to change the words. But no matter how cautious Emma is, it seems like she is still encounters in a situation that her assignment is regarded as plagiarized. So she was telling me a story back in her high school that she told me that this is actually her own word, but her assignment, some phrases and or clause in her assignment is detected as the same as the phrases on other online source in other website. And although she insists that it's her own word and she never saw that site before, her teacher didn't actually believe her, saying, "Oh, did you really not seeing that site?" And she's like, "If I saw that website, I'll definitely use another word." But it seems like she cannot help herself, but got a low score just because of that. So she's saying it's AI kind of software detecting whether she's plagiarized or her assignment is plagiarized or not. But she said she feel like it's her words. It's what she thought, and it's how she expressed her thoughts. If she has to use other way of saying things, it's not her language. And after that incident, she said she have to check for several times before she submit every assignment. And when we had this conversation, it's already like 4 years or 3 years after that incident, and she still not convinced why it's not her language, what she did wrong. So you can see that when a language learner facing the situation or facing this plagiarism detecting system, when their language has to compare with other language online, they seem to be put in a powerless position that they cannot claim what is their language. And I also talked to one instructor in a different EMI program. So William was born in the United States. He came to Japan to pursue her PhD course, and he's working currently as assistant professor. So when I was talking with him about the experience of he observing students use generative AI, he seems to be very opposed, like against this idea of students using it. And he said, "I would prefer students using their own words with all their mistake over a perfect grammar, because that's their language." So you can see that students' language, well, Williams kind of defined what students' language should be, while he's also mentioned that, well, grammar and spelling mistake will make you lose some point, but it will not fail you. So if you have any experience of learning a second language, especially learning it in an institution, especially in Asia, I think it's not difficult to realize that during this language education system, we constantly drag students' language to match with the native norms. Through all the teachers' correction or through all the tests, right? If student make a mistake in grammar or spelling, they will be penalized because of that. But somehow it seems like when we get to some point when it comes to the plagiarism issue, we kind of deny their language if it's too perfect for the instructor. So it seems like there exists a contradictory here for me. So I'm curious about how this contradiction happened. In order to understand that, I want to go back to the definition of plagiarism one more time. So if you look at the definition of plagiarism, you'll realize that the idea of plagiarism is actually based on two assumptions. First, ideas and words are ownable. And second, they are owned by distinguishable individuals. So in the early stage of my talk, I think we've noticed that the rules of these two assumptions can be changed over time in different society. But there's one more question I want to ask here is, at the very first place, how come a language that is in the way the individual express themselves can be owned? Here I want to skip the discussion between ideas and words because first of all, the time constraint. Second of all, in the education field, most of the case when they detect whether the idea is plagiarized or not, it's often reduced to the detection of the language. I want to draw Deleuze and Guattari's theory. The French philosophers Deleuze and Guattari, in their work 1,000 Plateaus, they discuss about the emergence of the state, where they mention about a concept called apparatus. My understanding of apparatus is an organizing power which function at direct or orient individual, or the individual or the things the way they should be or the way they could act. So in their discussion, they were talking about how different elements within the state system be extracted, right? So for example, if we look at the middle, how the idea of work is extracted and distinguished from the idea of activity. And they argue that through an apparatus called profit, the idea of profit puts different activities on the same stage. Then we can compare, for example, how much profit different activities produce. So once they become comparable, the activity, so through these apparatus, the activities then become comparable. And those activity which can produce profit may then gather together, for example, in a factory which is owned by a capitalist who can reinvestigate the profit in this capitalism circulation and claim the ownership of this surplus labor. So you can see this idea, this apparatus of profits actually make the activities comparable and appropriable from where the idea of work being extracted. Although Deleuze and Guattari didn't discuss about language from this perspective, I'm just curious whether language is undergoing the same process or not. So here, the way I use pure science might be different when Sunjin was mentioned about the science. By pure science, I'm not only referred to, for example, the sound I'm making here, which you can recognize as language, but pure science also include, for example, the gestures I'm making right now, or any like object that can that has the potential in engaging in the meaning-making process. So all the pure science, when they are documented in the print market. So for example, the sound of apple and the sound of apple, the moment when they document it in, for example, in an IPA format, it then can be compared from there, and the linguistic research or the language education then can establish a discourse based on this documented sign, right? They can start to say, okay, apple is a sound that match with the English quote unquote standard English language, and the sound apple might be I don't know, like used by language learners, which can be considered as a mistake. So you can see that the signs then become comparable and appropriable to each other, to where from where the named language, which I mean, for example, English, Japanese, Mandarin Chinese, the language as we know, this type of named language then be extracted and can be differentiated from other signs, which are called, for example, the deviant language. And the existence of deviant language is actually functioned at justify the power or the existence of named language. So I want to draw Giorgio Agamben, Italian philosopher's theory on the state of exception. When Agamben was discussing about a state of exception, he referred to places such as concentration camp. So in concentration camp, when the Jewish people was killed, the killer would not be penalized under the law. So the law is the applicability of the law is suspended here, but it doesn't mean that the law disappear, because if a person is killed outside of the state of exception concentration camp, the person will be penalized. So you can see that the existence of the state of exception is actually justified. The law is applicable outside of state of exception. It actually justified the power of servant, of them govern the lives through the law in the normal situation. And Agamben argued that in order for law to have power, in order to for servant to have power, they constantly require this state of exception to exist. And it's the similar situation in language. So if we think of deviant language, that's the language where the norms of named language is not there, right? It's mistake, it's not correct. However, it doesn't mean that norms of the named language disappear. On the contrary, it actually justifies these norms is applicable to the language that is not deviant, that is the named language. And it also, so we can say the existence of deviant language actually justified the existence of named language. In addition to that, we can think about it, if there's no deviant languages, if everybody never make any mistakes in speaking language, then there's no necessity for example, language education to exist. So you can see that the existence of deviant language actually justify the power of linguistic research and education to exert over science, different science. But this exclusion and again, this constantly require the deviant language to be excluded, right? As I said, from the learning material, from the learning model, and as an inferior type of language. But this exclusion does not only apply to language, but this exclusion also happens to the speaker who is regarded to use that language, to own that language. So I want to stop here a little bit and think about the idea of possession. And Washida is a philosopher here in Japan, and he wrote a book observing or looking at the meaning of be in different language, and show that the meaning of be always has two aspects. One is there is something, and that something can be accessible, something can be deposable. So you can see that the idea of possession actually closely related to the idea of existence. Hegel also mentioned that in the property, the will is embodied. So property is an external thing, but it kind of enforces the will. So you can see that the relationship between possession and individual is something internal, because something is belong or possessed by individual or a group of individuals, then it doesn't possessed by people outside of that group. So it actually functions as exclusive. And what people possess, for example, if they can exert the control over something, is actually construct, as Hegel mentioned, construct the individual, which in modern society is an independent, free individual. When Agamben talked about a state of exception, he mentioned about group of people he called homo sacer, which is excluded from both human region because they can be killed without the killer being penalized, and also excluded from the god, the sacral region, because they cannot be, they are inferior, they cannot be provided to the gods. And if we think of the exclusion that produced within this net language regime, there is actually a group of speaker, as you saw in Emma's interview, that is excluded from this free individual regime, who can never claim what their language is. So I'm running out of time, but I'll finish within 2 minutes. So I guess then it posed a question for us is, if we insist on the way we do language research, language education, it will constantly require this deviant language to exist. Then how can we steer away from that? The very recent post-humanist trend in academia may provide some clue for us. The humanist perspective rejects the idea of regarding human as the pure cause. So human is not the pure cause where writing happen, right? And the post-human perspective regarded writing as something emerged between the interaction between human and non-human. The agency emerged from there. So rather than machine or generative AI is considered as non-human at this stage, rather than exclude them or drag them into the human regime, right? Talk about this human idea of authorship, try to discuss them within the discussion of authorship, which we often the case based on human beings. I guess the existence of generative AI is posing a question of whether we can think about writing the other way around. What if the agents who write is not like human being individual, but the machine and all other materials? I want to end with a quote from Deleuze and Guattari, where they argue that to write is to become. To become is like a rhizome, like this picture in the background, is the constantly moving line, constantly disrupt, connect to other lines, but constantly change and keep moving on. So to write is not becoming writer, it's not representation of an individual or representation of thoughts within individual, but writing is becoming rats, becoming insects, becoming wolf. Writing, if we can open to the idea of writing where machines and all other material are engaging in this process of writing, maybe we can come up with new language, new syntax, new vocabulary, which can constitute a group of new people to come and new world to come. I'll end my presentation here. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry that I'm running out of time a little bit. Let's move on to our third presenter, Priya, before we have our discussion session. So Priya, if you can share. Yeah, thank you very much.
So can you see my whole screen? And you can hear me all right? Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Sunjin and Professor Xinqi, for your great presentation. This is the first time I'm listening to Xinqi-san's presentation, and it's very interesting because the question that can ideas be owned is something that I'll be talking about in my presentation. And so just to introduce myself, my name is Priya. I'm a doctoral student. I just started my second year at the GSII at University of Tokyo. I'm also a research assistant at the BAI Global Forum. So we had really wonderful theoretical discussions from Professor Sunjin and Professor Xinqi, but my presentation is going to be a bit on the industrial side, and I'll be focusing on the architecture industry, a little bit on the fashion, and hopefully this gives a complementary discussion from the side of the practice. And so in the book, the Decrypted Handbook of Artificial Intelligence, Identity and Technological Studies, which was edited by Anthony Elliott, Elizabeth Hill defines the self as the phenomenal me with conscious experience. She talks that selfhood is central in any form of conscious interaction with technology. It influences how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us in the context of interacting with technology. And she talks about there are two ways of looking at the topic of AI, selfhood and artificial consciousness, which is the title of a chapter. And the first one is the human-AI interaction, reflecting on how humans respond to and interact with AI, and the potential implications for selfhood, which is what I'll be focusing on my presentation. And she also says another way of looking at the topic through machines having artificial consciousness. So to give an anecdote of how humans interact with machines and how that defines a selfhood. Last year in summer in Japan, when I was still a master student, we had other master students at the BAI Global Forum, and we did an exhibition on the perceptions of how we perceive AI, and we called it Perceptions, Reconstructing AI Narratives. And for the exhibition, we had exhibits from students within the University of Tokyo and artists from outside the university. And one of the artists who joined our exhibition is Kanji Kyoda. He is a AI and digital fashion designer, and his ideas are quite unique because he interprets the Japanese traditional attire and takes it to the digital realm. And he uses these kind of digital spaces, which has these designs generated by generative AI for material creation and scans of Takeshita Street. For those who are not familiar with the street, it's a very popular street known for its fashion in the Harajuku district of Tokyo. And he uses photogrammetry to produce a fashion show that is impossible to replicate in reality. So I had the opportunity to ask him, what about AI is fascinating for you, and why did you choose to work with AI to make art? And he told me that before he saw the AI, what AI could do, he felt quite alone in his ideas because he couldn't relate. He couldn't relate with the existing fashion designers with what he wanted to create. And in a recent interview, he also mentioned that when he saw the possibilities of AI generated images, he thought, this is me, but this is beyond myself. And in the real world, clothing is designed to fit the human body, but with AI fashion, the reverse is possible. By using techniques like fluid simulation, the fabric can express itself, and the human body is then designed to complement its shape. While this concept is somewhat similar to corsets, it lacks the coercive power, revealing a highly natural relationship instead. And he explores the new perspectives on the relationship between fashion and the human body. And he talked about how this was so him. He could see his ideas because of this technology. And it's not exactly AI, but even for me, talking about architecture, we have this idea that all architects can draw really well, but I can't, unfortunately. But maybe in the past that was the case. But I think because of the tools that we use, we don't have to be good at freehand sketching to be a successful architect, I guess. And for me, I've used technology quite a lot. And this is an image that I made using some architecture tools and Photoshop in my undergraduate studio project, which I don't think I could have made using a canvas and oil paint. If I had maybe years of training, I could have. But so in these ways, like technology has been enabling us in different industries to do the things that we want to do, to express ourselves in a different way, and thereby reinforcing our selfhood. And to talk about AI, how is for architects, how relevant is AI? And I think when I talk about AI, there's different AIs in architecture. We have generative AI, we have AIs that can check the building performances. So it's used in different domains. But in my presentation, I'll be talking about the domain where they use generative AIs for conceptual designs. And this is a survey done by RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, in 2024, where they found out that 41% of the practices are using AI at least occasionally. And of the 41 of the people who are using it, they're mainly using it for the early design stage. And the second one is generative design and parametric design, which I'll talk about. They're kind of the same, which I'll talk about in the later stage of my presentation. So how does this work in AI? So what they do basically is you have these tools and you have the prompts and you get these ideas. And this is not something that's new in the field of architecture. Like if you've heard of Pinterest, when you want to do some designs, you have your own Pinterest board with a lot of ideas, and you kind of take here and there from different ideas, make a collage, and try to come up with your own design. So this works in a very similar way. And many architects who use AI, they use it for the reason that it comes up with ideas that you could have never thought about. And this idea that coming up with designs that you could never think of on your own is not something that AI brought into the industry. We've had it since the late 80s, early 90s in the form of parametric design. So if for those who are not familiar with what parametric design is, it is a design method in which features such as building elements and engineering components are shaped based on algorithmic processes rather than direct manipulation. In this approach, the parameters or rules establish the relationship between design intent and design response, moving away purely from intuitive to a more systematic and data-driven approach. So this is one of the first buildings that used this ideology, and it's by Frank Gehry. It's the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. It was designed using a software called CATIA, which was originally designed for aerospace design, but later extended into other industries, including architecture. And in around the turn of the century, we had tools, our own tools, like Grasshopper, Rhinoceros, that we used to make generative design or parametric design. And one of the pioneers in using this tools is Zaha Hadid. I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of her. So Zaha Hadid architects use Grasshopper and generative AI pretty intensely. And my case study that I'm going to talk about with some of the ethical concerns that may arise with respect to using generative AI is to do with the Zaha Hadid architects. Because Zaha Hadid, she passed away in 2016, and her firm was taken over by her long-term partner, Patrick Schumacher. He joined the firm in 1988, and he's been the partner since 2002. He's also a theorist, and he also teaches at university in the UK and other parts of the world. And Schumacher has been instrumental in developing the firm into a global architecture and design brand. He has continued to lead the firm, emphasizing the parametric design approach that he and Hardy championed. And there were a lot of issues with keeping the firm's name as Hadid Architects. It's usually common. So in the industry, when the principal architect passes away, so the partner takes over, it's typical to change the name of the firm. But there are also examples where the firm names have been not changed, but that's very rare. In Zaha Hadid's case, the firm name was not changed, and it had a lot of controversies. But they decided to keep the name because to preserve her legacy, for the brand recognition, and Schumacher's vision as well. Because he is widely recognized for promoting parametricism, which is a term that he coined in 2008 to describe a new style for the 21st century, emphasizing the use of computational design techniques to create complex adaptive architectural forms, which aligns with the firm's principles and like philosophy. And also the use of AI tools, the use of new technology aligns with the firm's philosophy. Except I was a little, I wouldn't say surprised, but when I read this article from Design, it's a very popular newsletter in the field of architecture. Schumacher talked about using AI for almost all projects to come up with initial concept designs. And the text is quite small, but if you can see, the prompt often includes the word Zaha Hadid style or her name. So the idea is to navigate the challenge of preserving the founder's legacy while steering the brand or firm into a new direction. So I had some concerns with this statement because what do we talk about legacy when we talk about legacy of a person or of their vision? And Zaha's legacy is her legacy as a person. So it's quite, as an artist, it's quite difficult to maintain to carry on their vision because it's so much part of their self. And Zaha Hadid in an interview in 1995, this is an excerpt from the interview, and she says, and this is on the left is a drawing abstract drawing that she made for one of the competitions in Hong Kong in 1983. And she says that people did not understand my use of color. They thought that the colors in the paintings would be colors of the buildings. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. In paintings, depending on the time of the day, they could be red, but the building isn't necessarily painted red. So although there was a very strong link in the renderings, it was misunderstood. My drawings are not buildings. They are about the buildings. They are not illustrations of a final product. You have to view them as text. For me, these are essential tools because they are the only way I can determine whether something is right or not wrong. As long as there is clarity in the idea, you can change other things. So this was her vision, and it's quite challenging to understand and also to accept that an AI, generative AI can carry on this legacy that was part of the vision of a person. So this is where some of the ethical concerns that I have come up. So with authenticity and versus innovation, Schumacher has continued Hadid's parametric design legacy, but has also expanded into new territories, including AI-driven concept designs. While AI tools align with Hadid's embrace of cutting-edge technology, they may raise questions about whether the resulting designs still carry the intuitive and personal characteristics of her work. And the concern with the ownership of creative legacy, like what Professor Xinqi talked about in her presentation about can ideas be owned? So Schumacher has faced criticism for making decisions that some argue might not align with Hadid's intention, particularly his pro-market ideologies, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and the firm's ventures into AI-generated designs. These developments raise questions about who owns the creative design of the firm. Is it Schumacher as a leader or Hadid as the originator? And the use of technology and automation in concept design introduces questions about authorship and creativity. AI can generate designs based on parameters set by the firm, but it raises concerns about whether such designs can be considered as true to Hadid's intuitive and hands-on process. And commercialization of the legacy. So as the firm expands into AI and potentially more automated design processes, there is a risk of commercializing the firm's output in ways that might prioritize efficiency or profitability over creative depth. So these are some of the concerns. And this is a project that they are doing in, I think it's 2024 in Dubai, and it's a mixed use beachfront development. I just included the budget of the project to give you an idea of the scale at which we're talking about. And this is so, I don't know, like if you talk to architecture students or people in the architecture field, this really doesn't resonate with the style of Zaha Hadid. And it's quite arguable if you ask if she would have designed this building this way if she had been alive. So these kind of questions, these kind of things raise questions about using generative AI to come up with concept designs, and in a way, it's perpetuating the capitalism using in the name of legacy by maintaining the brand name. So some of the questions I have, these are not necessarily discussion questions, but some questions that we can think about when it comes to these how legacies work in the creative industry. Should successors have freedom to reinterpret a legacy, or are they ethically bound to adhere strictly to the original vision? Is it ethical to attribute AI-generated designs to the legacy of the creator who relied on human intuition and artistry? And how should the role of AI in the creative process be transparently communicated to clients and the public? And this is another major concern of mine, is that the excessive commercialization of a legacy undermine the integrity of the original vision, because Zaha Hadid's legacy is not just in her design. She is the first female recipient of the Pritzker Award. Pritzker Award is the biggest award given in the field of architecture, and it started in 1979. So she got the award in 2004, 25 years after the award was initiated. She was the first woman of color, and it brings into dialogue about the questions of the social responsibilities of public figures in these fields, because they are also educators. And another surprising thing for me was when I was trying to prepare for this presentation and look up on existing issues, existing controversies on using AI, particularly with respect to the Zaha Hadid architecture. It was interesting because I couldn't find a lot of articles or issues or interviews discussing about the ethical issues in this context. There was some interesting articles about the current principal architects' stand on pro-market and social housing, but that's not relevant to this presentation, so I will not discuss that. But it made me think about how these ethical issues are discussed differently within different disciplines. And especially with the advent of AI and how we are all talking about ethics, the issue of ethics. And I think this is these sort of cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary discussions are bridging some of the issues that these disciplines fundamentally lack, that they should have they should talk about, but they're not talking about. So I feel this is a very good opportunity for us to reassess the fundamental issues that we might have sensed or we know exist for sure in our own disciplines. These dialogues about how AI and technology at large hopefully help us ask the right questions as we progress in defining our individual selfhood and collective selfhood, or humanhood, as coined by William McCall in 1847. So these are my breakout room questions. The first one, I think, is the main question, where I ask, when innovation challenges tradition, how do we ethically navigate the tension between disrupting norms and preserving the values embedded in them? And another question, because I'm sure we're all from different disciplines, so I'm quite interested in knowing if you have any ideas or if you have any thoughts on whether AI is influencing or affecting the core and fundamental principles of your own field. So thank you so much for your time. And if I didn't get into the details, the technical details, but if you have any questions, you can ask me in the breakout room or you can reach out to me at LinkedIn. Thank you.